You're listening to another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A deep dive into a classic show whose influence is immeasurable. Your next stop? Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast where I review The Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology series. For archives of all of my episodes, visit AnthologyPod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at Facebook.com/AnthologyPod and follow me on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod and check out the rest of my podcasts at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcast. And if you'd like to support what I do here, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to exclusive B-roll episodes, TV and book reviews, movie reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and early access to podcast episodes and previously unreleased content. Again, that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For instance, this episode is posting on Wednesday, July 6th, but all of my patrons on Patreon got access to it on Saturday, July 2nd, which is when I'm recording it. So in addition to that, there's a ton of stuff there. I did episode reviews of Stranger Things, which I posted on the Obsessive Viewer podcast as a little teaser. And I also did Foundation, and I've done commentary tracks for Ex Machina and a bunch of different movies and stuff. So anyway, that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Check that out if you are interested in more content. So today on the show, I'm going to be discussing 5 characters in search of an exit. It's the 14th episode of The Twilight Zone's 3rd season, and it originally aired on December 22nd, 1961. And of course, I'll be rounding out the episode with a brief review of Science Fiction Theater Season 1, Episode 22, A Visit from Dr. Pliny, which that episode, at least for the time being, I'm very gun-shy about saying whether or not the episodes of Science Fiction Theater are available to view on the internet, but I did find a link to this episode on YouTube, which I'll link in the show notes of this episode. That YouTube link was posted, or that YouTube video was posted 8 days ago, so I don't know if it'll get hit with like a copyright notice or taken down or what have you. At this point, it's such a bummer when those, like, this is a very old classic television show, and I kind of feel like if it's not going to be streaming anywhere, if it's not going to be posted, it's not going to be, if the physical release is discontinued and everything, what's the harm in posting it online? Like, what is the harm in that? I know that there's copyrights and all of that, and it is, I don't know. It's all a big thing, but I mean, if it's not available anywhere else, just make it available somewhere. And I'm super excited to talk about this episode after I talk about The Twilight Zone, because this episode was excellent, and it's such a shame. Anyway, so more on Science Fiction Theater later in this episode. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode for The Twilight Zone and everything else. Before I get into it, I do want to mention there is a new Twilight Zone podcast out there. It's the Twilight Zone Sandbox. I listened to the first episode, and the guy, oh my god, I can't remember his name. The guy who hosts it, it's another one-man show. Yeah, it's very entertaining. It's I definitely recommend checking it out. There's no shortage of Twilight Zone content out there, and obviously, if you're listening to this, you know well enough that you can't get enough of Twilight Zone out there. So it's Twilight Zone Sandbox. Check that out on Twitter at Zone Sandbox. It's really cool. Like, he released his first episode a few days ago, and he does this really cool he has a bunch of different segments and everything, or a bunch of different styles. So the first episode is part 1 of a 2-part episode about Cliff Robertson, and like, I love it. Like, he talks about so he, like, the style of it is like, oh, it's a bubblegum card trivia thing. And so he does, like, it's very energetic, very cool. I really liked it. So check that out. Twilight Zone Sandbox on Twitter @Zone Sandbox. And he had some nice things to say about my show as well. So thank you so much. But anyway, check that out. Yeah, and I just realized that we are on the cusp of, or when you're listening to this on the main feed, we just passed the July 4th marathon, which I haven't. So with the marathons and everything, and I know I'm being very, I'm being very scattered in this episode and everything, and I hate it as much as you guys do, but, with the Twilight Zone marathons that happen on July 4th and on New Year's Day, I never see them because of the entire conceit of this podcast being the first time that I'm watching the Twilight Zone. But I would love to, like, I don't know, I would love to sit down and, like, mainline a Twilight Zone marathon someday when I finish the series. Technically, I can do that, I can just skip around. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the marathon. I hope that it's still going on, because I know some years it's not done. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the marathon and everything. So, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dig in to 5 characters in search of an exit. And of course, I'm going to be spoiling the episode from the jump, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out on Paramount Plus or, physical media, whatever. And then come back and listen. So, as always, I'm going to start with the plot summary, courtesy of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr., which I recommend picking up. That is a just massive tome of information about the show. It's a lifesaver for me, really. So here we go, plot summary, courtesy of Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. 5 people wake to find themselves in a deep circular pit, unaware of who they are, where they are, how they got there, and how long they will remain. Judging by the costumes they wear, their professions are truly varied: a bagpipe player, a clown, a ballerina, an army major, and a hobo. Not only do they question their identities, but their prison as well. Could they be in an alien spacecraft? Could this be a mirage? Perhaps they are dead and this is limbo. The only thing certain is the loud ringing that echoes in their ears every so often, and the only exit is up above. In desperation, the 5 of them stand on each other's shoulders to reach the top of the pit. After 2 attempts, they succeed. The army major reaches the top, losing his balance, and falls over the edge. Outside in the snow, a little girl picks up a small doll of an army major and puts it back in the barrel. Their identities revealed, they are merely unwanted dolls donated to the View Park Girls' Home for the 17th annual Christmas Doll Drive. Down inside the barrel, the dolls remain motionless, and the ballerina sheds a tear, for she is aware of her identity and the fact that they were all unwanted. So, this episode stars 5 actors. First is Susan Harrison, who was the ballerina. This was her only episode of The Twilight Zone, and it appears that she stopped acting shortly after this episode, like in the mid-60s, I think. And there aren't many credits to her name or anything. I did find out that she passed away in 2019, so that's something, but she apparently retired from acting or stopped acting in the 60s. And then as the major is William Wyndham. This is his first of 2 Twilight Zone episodes, with the next one being Season 4's Miniature. And he also made 2 appearances in Night Gallery, and he also appeared in the Rod Serling scripted 1972 movie The Man. And then as the clown, probably the standout performance of the episode is Murray Matheson. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in the Kick the Can segment of the Twilight Zone movie, and he was also in Assault on a Queen from 1966, which was a movie or TV movie, I'm not sure, that was written by Serling. And he also made 1 appearance in an episode of Night Gallery. And then elsewhere, elsewhere in the sci-fi anthology realm, he appeared in 1 episode of Tales of Tomorrow in 1953, and 1 episode of One Step Beyond in 1960. And it's worth noting, at least I couldn't find any information otherwise, but he is apparently no relation to Richard Matheson. And then the next 2, we've got Kelton Garwood as the Tramp. or the hobo. This was his only episode of the Twilight Zone, and I couldn't really find anything else of noteworthiness in his filmography. And then rounding out the cast as the bagpiper is Klark Allen, and this was his only episode of the Twilight Zone. And similar to Susan Harrison, he didn't act much, but he was also a singer of some renown. And I did find an interesting piece of trivia about him. This is taken from the IMDb bio on him, on his IMDb page, but Klark Allen was shot in a robbery attempt at his nightclub, the El Cid, in 1972. He nearly died from the wound. His recovery, which took nearly a year, surprised even his doctors. So that's pretty interesting and wild. So anyway, that's interesting. Writer for this episode is Rod Serling. It was based on a short story titled The Depository by Marvin H. Peddle, and according to Unlocking the Door to Television Classic, Marvin Peddle was kind of starting out as a writer. He was kind of working and writing some things he's writing here and there. I think he wrote some stories for a local TV station, I think. I'm not sure. But he saw an opportunity when he was going to be attending a Democratic Party rally that he knew Rod Serling was going to be at. So he ended up writing a 5-page synopsis for a story called The Depository. He wrote it completely on spec and was planning to approach Serling at the party. And that's what he did. He approached Serling, kind of similar to, I can't remember the writer's name, but the lady who approached him at a party for, I think it was either The Hitchhiker or I Shot an Arrow in the Air. I think it was I Shot an Arrow into the Air. Anyway, so Marvin Peddle approached Serling, and Serling told him to go ahead and give the story to Buck Houghton, and they ended up buying the story, and Serling ended up writing the script entirely. And it's funny because it's not funny, it's kind of sad, but in Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Peddle is quoted as saying that he only got an upfront fee of $250 for the story, and he regretted not getting any residuals from it. So as many times as the episode aired on television, he never saw any residuals for the work that he did, or the story that he wrote, since Serling ended up writing the entire script and just based it on his story. For those who don't know, in case you don't know, residuals are basically anytime a movie or show appears on television, the people involved with it get, sometimes it's very small, but they get paid for every airing of it. Very, small amounts, but they add up and everything. So that is the kind of behind the scenes of the writing of this episode. Director for this episode was Lamont Johnson. This was his second of 8 total Twilight Zone episodes. We previously saw his work in the absolutely stunning episode The Shelter. And next we will see from him is in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about Nothing in the Dark. And an interesting piece of trivia and note about Lamont Johnson is that his actual final directing credit before he passed away in the mid-aughts, I think, was for an episode of Felicity, which I will talk about later. Felicity episode, season 2, I think episode 11, titled Help for the Lovelorn, which that episode of Felicity, I found while researching this episode, was a complete homage to the Twilight Zone, even down to being shot in black and white, having an opening and closing narration, having just kind of some very fantastical science fiction properties to it, and even incorporating some of the music. So it's really interesting that they got Lamont Johnson to direct that specific episode of Felicity, but I'm going to try to hold my tongue a little bit when I get to trivia for this episode, because there's a whole J.J. Abrams rant that I'm going to make about this episode of Felicity and J.J. Abrams in general. So anyway, but Help for the Lovelorn, that episode of Felicity, it is available to stream on Hulu, and it does, in addition to having a ton of Twilight Zone kind of homages and everything, it does very, very, very directly pay homage to this particular episode of the Twilight Zone. So that's interesting that they got Lamont Johnson to direct that. So now, with the talent rundown, let me go into my feelings as a viewer of 5 characters in search of an exit. And first of all, this is one of those episodes where what I knew before I watched it for the first time was a considerable amount. So this is one of the more popular episodes of the show. There's no question of that. And one that I felt like I knew a lot about because it's just kind of, it's very much ubiquitous in pop culture when you're talking about the Twilight Zone. And so what I knew beforehand was that it's about 5 people that are trapped in a box and that they're all different characters. And I knew that there was a clown and maybe a ballerina. But I knew that they were all actually dolls in a toy box. That's what I thought it was, at least. And what I kind of thought about when going into this episode for the first time was I wasn't sure if that's like the big reveal at the end of the episode or if it's the conceit of the episode and revealed to us at the beginning. So I didn't know if it was going to be like a Toy Story thing where we know that they're toys, and the episode is about them coming to terms with that fact, or if it was a thing at the end. I kind of, if I had to wager a guess at the time, I would have said probably 80% likely that the twist was that they're toys in a box, and I was right. But anyway, so let me get into my thoughts on 5 characters in search of an exit. So we start out with the Major waking up, and my immediate thought when I saw that was he looks like a pilot of some kind. And I really thought that the shots of the opening at the top were really kind of neat, like geometrically speaking. Like, this is a very bare bones set, and it kind of really is very evocative and interesting because we have this complete blank space of a very confined space, really, for these 5 people to inhabit. And since they are all like dressed in very specific wardrobes from whatever their identity is or whatever, it kind of brings out this level of detail in the wardrobe and in the characters, because we're not seeing them in like a regular state. We're seeing them in this blank canvas of a barrel, and I thought that was really interesting. And in addition to that, I really like that it opens up with the Major waking up and him like clearly being incredibly confused and perplexed by his, entrapment in this barrel. And I really like that because it gives this sense of abduction to the story, and it kind of gets under your skin a little bit. It gets this level of fear and horror in the episode, like this psychological trauma of like, okay, these people are awake in this space, this very limited space with no interaction outside. There's no inclination of what's outside except for this opening that just looks like you can see the moon and you can see some mist there in a couple parts, but that's it. And it's really interesting. It gives this sense of like that they are being held captive and that they are victims of an abduction of some kind. So I think that that's really interesting. And then the Major meets the clown, and the clown, again, Murray Matheson nails this performance. He is the standout. In fact, I think that the actor playing the Major, William Wyndham, I hate to disparage it. Like, I kind of feel guilty being a little critical of him, but that's kind of my job. That's what I'm doing here. But I kind of feel like William Wyndham doesn't really sell me on what like on his fear and on his like exasperated attempts at escape. There's just something about his performance that just doesn't ring fully true. It just seems a little bit off kilter, and maybe that's kind of the point, and maybe that's also due to the fact that it is this limited set that has this kind of reverby, echoey thing in the sound design, which I think is really interesting. But it kind of seems like a little bit, I don't know, it doesn't really ring all that true to me. But the clown, Murray Matheson, is phenomenal. He has this very animated personality that really gives that impression of kind of insanity to an extent. And maybe that's maybe part of that is just, he's a clown, and clowns are objectively terrifying in general, but also, I mean, I kind of feel like, clowns in general are like, there's a level of, I don't know, I have to connect it to like the Joker from Batman, like in general, like all the way to Cesar Romero, every iteration of the Joker, he's the clown prince of crime. So like, I think that he has like the character of the Joker throughout the years has really colored the perception of clowns in general. So like, this is a circus clown, and he's very animated and everything, but I think that just because of the stature from my perspective and my history with pop culture and everything, of seeing the Joker and not seeing like an actual clown in real life or anything, thank God, but that gives this impression of insanity. But it works here because of the conceit of the episode being that they are all trapped in this confined space, and that confined space is a place that has driven, in some respects, possibly driven some or all of them mad with insanity. But it doesn't really go full bore into that insanity thing. And it doesn't really go full bore into the insanity thing or into some other aspects of the episode, which I think is a shortcoming, which I'll talk about in a bit. But for now, we're getting introduced to the characters. The major has amnesia, and then the clown, I have in my notes, this is weird. Pilot is an army man with amnesia, and the clown has a potted plant on his head. I don't know why I thought that was silly. I don't know why it was worth putting in my notes, but in this kind of prologue, this introductory sequence, I kind of thought, like, because I knew in the back of my head that, these are toys and everything. I wondered, did this inspire Toy Story? Like, I need to look into it and see if the people at Pixar kind of drew inspiration from this, because it has to be, obviously, like it's got to be inspired by it, because it's very similar. But yeah, I was just kind of tickled by that, because I just recently rewatched Toy Story, so that was kind of fresh in my mind. So the major says that he asks if there's a circus. He's like he's still thinking in terms of the outside world, and the clown kind of jokes with him about it. He's saying that it's logical to think that there's a circus and that there's that there's war, but really those don't exist because we're here. Like, this kind of plays into the thing that the hobo says later, that it is this that this is their universe, that this is the entirety of existence in this one space. So nothing exists outside of it. There's no circus, there's no war, there's nothing outside. And that is this very interesting nihilistic viewpoint from the clown. And it's something that is kind of propped up a bit throughout the episode, as the other four characters, aside from the major, have been just resigned to their fate. And it's just really interesting from kind of an existential perspective and this nihilistic viewpoint. And then, so the clown then introduces the major to the other three characters. There's the bagpipe player, there's the ballet dancer, and then there is the homeless man. And at this point in my first viewing, I was just so I was pretty wrapped up in the episode. I was really intrigued by it. I feel like there was a certain sense of surrealness throughout the episode, and how unsettling it was, because these are distinctive characters, and their confinement, their entrapment was very clear from the outset. And I think that that's a really good way of using the storytelling and demonstrating the storytelling in the episode. And then again, like, William Wyndham, I think was his name, he's kind of, I don't know if I really buy his like energy, and I think that it's partly it's a tough role. It's a tough role because all of the other characters are resigned to their existence and everything, and he is the one that is, he is saddled with the responsibility of being like the person in the group who is not ready to, or hasn't lost his resolve for escape, or hasn't lost his mind, really. So it's a tough role, but like when he is yelling like, where are we, who are we, it just seems a little bit false to me. I don't know exactly how to articulate that, but it just feels a little weird to me. It doesn't really make sense to me. Or I mean, it makes sense to me on a dialogue level, of course, but it doesn't really hook me the way that, the concept itself hooks me. So I think the ballerina then says, like, none of us knows who we are, and we each woke up here in the darkness. And that I just felt like is a really interesting existential idea, but I feel like the episode overall, which I'll probably get to as I go through my notes, doesn't really like explore that to my liking enough. It does explore it, but not quite as well as I would hope it would, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But when the ballerina is speaking, I found it really interesting. Susan Harrison does a phenomenal job in this episode because she speaks in this very vacant and toneless tone, if that makes sense. Like this very vacant, like, none of us knows who we are. It's very haunting and ominous and creepy. It's just very, very unsettling. And then kind of juxtaposing that with the clown who is speaking with this unsettled insanity, or this goofy like sarcasm that's drenched in this manic energy and this madness that he seems to have. So I think that's really interesting. It's a really good dynamic at play there. So then we get the opening narration from Rod Serling, which I will play right now.
We be here? That's a very good question. That's the best question of all. But nobody knows the answer.
Clown, hobo, ballet dancer, bagpiper, and an army major. A collection of question marks. 5 improbable entities stuck together into a pit of darkness. No logic, no reason, no explanation. Just a prolonged nightmare in which fear, loneliness, and the unexplainable walk hand in hand through the shadows. In a moment, we'll start collecting clues as to the whys, the whats, and the wheres. We will not end the nightmare, we'll only explain it. Because this is the Twilight Zone.
So right from the outset, that opening narration, I think it's really interesting. And I think most of all, I want to highlight 2 things about it. One is that I really like how Serling is positioned. He's speaking the narration from the top of the opening, kind of looking down on it. And it gives this kind of omniscient power behind it. And I think that that's really interesting. And as far as the actual like dialogue of the narration, or the opening narration, is the thing that really stood out to me and carried with me throughout the entire episode the first time I watched it, was when he says, "We will not end the nightmare, we'll only explain it." And I found that to be very, again, like ominous and a little unsettling. It's something that I find really intriguing about this episode, is the fact that it takes this premise that is by and large a very horror leaning premise. Like, these people are incarcerated, they're trapped, they don't have any way of getting out. And to, like, it is literally, like, I know that a lot of episodes kind of start with Serling saying that it's like you're entering a nightmare or whatever, but this is like legitimately a nightmare. And to kind of have this, have him say like, we will not end the nightmare, we'll only explain it, really kind of helps create this fear of the episode, and really kind of helps the viewer take in the fear of the characters and their situation. So I think that was really a really good opening narration for the episode. And overall, like when we come back from the narration, I was just really interested in the kind of setup. I thought that that prologue was really interesting, a good way to bring us into like the rules and the situation at hand. And I thought that was really good, really well done. And as we come back from the narration, we see that the Major is kind of realizing the futility of his entrapment. He is he's starting to get a little bit antsy about it. And that's juxtaposed with the other characters in the barrel having been clearly kind of resigned to their entrapment. And it gives us this vague sense that the other characters have been trapped there for a significant amount of time. And I love the way that the story addresses that here in a bit, which I'll talk about. But it just really, right from the outset, it's like, okay, these characters have, like, they've realized how out of luck they are, how futile their attempts to escape are. So they are just kind of, they're in a different mind space. So the juxtaposition of that with the Major being like, okay, now the adrenaline is pumping, he is ready to look for a way out. And throughout the episode, his resolve to escape is tampered down significantly throughout the course of the episode. It's really interesting. So as they're all talking, we get this run of dialogue where each character kind of gives like a little, like, kind of not absent-minded, but very vacant or very slow, kind of slow and emotionless, really, estimation or hypothesis about where they are. And it's very much a again, that kind of resigned to their fate kind of tone. So I kind of want to highlight this because I thought this was really cool. I have no idea if this is actually like intentional or this is an intentional thing, but each one kind of seems like it is referencing, if not directly, it's just indirectly referencing another episode of the Twilight Zone. So like the ballet dancer says, maybe we're on a spaceship going to another planet, and like I pegged that as, oh, third from the sun. And then she says, maybe we're all insane, or maybe this is a mirage or illusion, which I was like, oh, King 9 will not return. And then the homeless man says, we're dead and this is limbo, and I'm like, oh, the passersby. And then the bagpiper says, we don't really exist, we're dream figures from someone else's existence. And when he said that, I kind of squealed a little bit. I was like, shadow play, okay. Like, I have no idea if that was intentional, if that, like, Rod Serling kind of doing like a cheeky, like, meta referencing thing, but like, I don't know, just all four of those just back to back to back. I was like, oh, that's pretty awesome. I love that. So anyway, the Major mentions, and here's where I really like the kind of detail. He mentions that there must have been someone down there, or they must have been down there a while, and that someone must be bringing them food and water. And the ballet dancer says no one has brought them food or water. And I thought that was really interesting, because that is, I mean, obviously I knew what the outcome was. I knew what was going on and everything, but I love that the show kind of addresses that as a potential plot hole, I guess. Maybe not plot hole, because I think that term gets kind of twisted around a little bit, but it is something that introduces a certain logic or lack thereof to it, and it is addressing that lack of logic in a direct way, while also making it more intriguing and more interesting, more mysterious. So I really like that. And then the Major is like, well, we're going to starve to death, or we're going to die of thirst. Like, what's going on? And then they all mention like they don't feel anything. Like there's no feeling down there. And the Major again is trying to incorporate logic into this. And he claims that it's shock, or the aftermath of shock. And this is one of the more haunting lines of dialogue in the episode, is when the ballet dancer says, "We've been here for an endless time," which is really interesting and, again, nihilistic, crazy, and it kind of helps with the panic of the Major, like the panic energy of the Major. Like, I wasn't the biggest fan of the actor's performance of the Major, but it does count. It is the panic in his performance, the panic of the character counterbalances the nihilism of the other characters really, really well. And again, the sound design of the episode is really interesting with that kind of reverb of the dialogue, because they're in a hollow barrel. It gives us that all the more sense of emptiness in it. It's really interesting because it feels like this episode should be completely claustrophobic, and it is claustrophobic, but it's really interesting to hear that echo, that reverb in the dialogue as they're talking, because that fills the negative space in an oral sense, or an aural sense, that just really makes it feel that all the more like lonesome and isolated. And I really like that. Yeah. And then the homeless man kind of goes on to talk about how they've gone through this before. They've gone through this whole ordeal of trying to figure out a way out. But he says another very nihilistic, very crazy, depressing kind of realization or rationalization. He says, "We discovered that this is the universe. For our purposes, this is the universe. This is all that there is." And I really, really like that. And then we get the next big wrinkle from the story, in that the bell rings. And I was not expecting that. I didn't know that was going to be a part of the story at all. And I really, really like that, because that adds more of a physical nightmare to it, and a certain threat that comes from the unexplainable. So in addition to the psychological horror and psychological fear of the confinement, we get this completely deafening external thing that is not something that they understand or can really know. And the kind of deafening of the soundtrack, like the booming tone of it, and the way that the camera shakes is really adds texture to that. And it's another good way of like kind of keeping us on our toes and keeping the characters on their toes, or at least the Major on his toes. Because we feel like at the moment, we feel like we know the situation. We know like we've now gotten accustomed to what is going on. And each time we feel that way, they add a new wrinkle. Like the whole fact that like, okay, we understand that they're trapped, but okay, how do they get food and water? Oh, they don't need food and water because they don't feel anything. Well, that's interesting. That's a new wrinkle. And then it's like, okay, now we know that it's a weird like universe thing, or that they exist in this space. So now we can start thinking about how to get out. Oh, no, wait, there's a booming bell ringing sound that adds just an entirely new piece of creepiness to it. So I really like the way that it's kind of structured and everything. So here, after that, we get one of the more interesting and best scenes of the episode, in my opinion, and it's kind of strange too. So at this point, the homeless man says something like, why don't you dance for the Major and help pass the time? And the bagpiper's like, yeah, and I'll play music for you. And there's this level of kind of sort of disturbing level of unhingedness in this moment, but it's also kind of wholesome and sweet. So the ballet dancer gets up and starts dancing around as the bagpiper is bagpiping and playing his music. And I found that to be a couple of different things. One is, again, that very wholesome, very interesting kind of human element to it. Like there's something innately human about the way that the characters just decide on the fly to try to cheer up the Major through music and dancing. And it kind of gives off this almost sense of community, or this desire to entertain others and spread happiness to others, which really plays in it. Like, it makes the fact that they're dolls to be donated, it makes that land a little bit harder. Like, they are just programmed. They are innately ready to entertain each other. And I think that is really interesting, and kind of tells this very interesting kind of human story of these inanimate objects, basically. and kind of deep down, I think that and I feel like the subtext or the themes of the episode, again, aren't really explored quite as well, so I could be kind of projecting what's maybe not fully there, but it kind of feels like this is about people, like human beings, like being ripped out of their world and then yearning to be among other people. It's when you take human beings out of a society, out of like the functions of society and around like other people and everything, they will effectively want and yearn to be among other people and be in society. So I think that there's something there, but there's not really enough text in the story to really explore that with as much depth as several other episodes of the Twilight Zone do. So I don't know, but anyway, so the Major then kicks the wall, and he's just kind of going through all of these different ideas on how to escape. And he thinks that kind of kicking the wall or breaking through the wall is worth a try for escape. And the clown just kind of admonishes him and throws sarcasm at him, says like, there's no, like, our hands cannot break through this. It's metal. It's useless. You're an idiot. Like, he calls him, he says you're an idiot. But I don't remember the exact words, but like, he basically saying like he's a resilient idiot or something. And then the Major kind of reacts to that, or responds to that with, no, we won't use our hands, we'll use this sword that's laying here. And then he takes the sword and tries to break through the wall, and it just shatters into pieces. And I really like this, because this is where the Major's resolve for escape kind of starts to break down a little bit. And then it's kind of then it gets to a scene where the ballet dancer is talking to him about the different about the different about the different theories about where they are. So as his kind of resolve is starting to break, this very captivating character of the ballet dancer says in this very flat and defeated tone that she suggests that the dungeon might be a place for the unloved, and maybe that's what they are. It has this undercurrent of optimism running throughout it. Like, her tone, it's kind of weird. Like, the content of her words are defied by the tone in which she's speaking them. So like, she says, maybe we're unloved, maybe that's it. And the tone she uses suggests like it shifts a little bit and suggests a kind of pleasant optimism, like in a sense that she is saying, it's like she's saying, this is maybe an answer to the unanswerable. And so maybe that's good. Maybe we're unloved. Maybe that's it. And not quite as cheerful as that, but there's like this subtext, this underlying kind of tone that has like, oh, maybe that's it. It's elevating her tone, her normal flat and defeated tone. But it's so contradictory, because she has that kind of like, maybe we're loved, maybe we're unloved, maybe that's it. It's so, and she says that as like, maybe I answered the question, but the answer is just so wildly bleak and upsetting and, again, nihilistic and just very sad and depressing. Like, maybe we're unloved, maybe we are just unloved. That is so bleak, and it's said in such a way that makes it sound like she's sort of almost happy that she maybe has a suggestion for the answer. And that also kind of plays into the fact that all the characters, or the characters in the story, are kind of all share this thing of like, they want to help other people, they want to be in each other's lives in certain capacities, and that's what they're programmed for, that's what they were created for as dolls, to help, to help kids and everything. So I don't know, that's interesting. But on the other hand, I kind of feel like that idea is it's kind. I kind of feel like by saying that they're unloved and maybe that's it, feels like a little bit of a stretch. Like it feels like the episode is communicating its central premise and theme a little too directly. Like I don't know. It kind of feels like having a character like specifically say like maybe we're unloved this early in the story feels a little bit just, I don't know. It just feels like a little bit like hitting the nail on the head a little too early and too directly. So I don't know, but you know, whatever. Then the Major, he's so perplexed by it. He says like, we must have names. We're people. There must be people out there who care. And again, that really plays into that subtext. This is a much better line of dialogue to kind of play into that, subtext of them being unloved and unwanted and everything, and that being kind of their central kind of thing. Because that's an outward expression of speaking to the assumption of, you know, reality and the assumption of being alive. Like, oh yeah, well, we are human beings. We must have names. We're people. We are human beings, and there must be other human beings out there who care about us enough to realize that we are not where we should be, or we are not reachable. And so that kind of bumps up his resolve a little bit more. Even if he can't remember knowing anyone, he knows that is a part of being human, is connecting with other humans, and that kind of brings back his resolve to try to break out. And then it's immediately dropped down again because he starts trying to dig a tunnel. And I thought that this connection was really interesting, because we're like coming up on the first act break, and he says, like, as he's trying to dig and it's completely futile, he says, oh, I know where we are. And like, this is preparing for the act break. And like, as soon as he started saying that, like, he knows where they are, and they drag it out a little bit too much, but like I put in my notes, he's going to say hell. He's going to say that they're in hell, because like that connection is really interesting. Like him trying to dig and then realizing like, oh, I can't dig because we're already at the bottom of existence. We're in hell. Like, we're actually in hell. That's probably what it is. And then he kind of does this whole thing where he's just like, you know, it's unequivocal. We are, I know exactly where we are. We're in hell. And it's very, I don't know. It's very, very animated and everything. But also there's something about his delivery of that. We are in hell. It kind of seems a little bit, I don't know. It doesn't seem as serious as it should be, I guess. I don't know. So then the act break happens. And again, this is another example of it playing into that kind of communal, helping others kind of thing. Because the characters are sitting by and watching the Major keep like tapping on the wall and trying to figure out ways to escape. And they kind of agree to just let him try, and that it's implied that he's been going at it for hours, which is interesting for two reasons. One, it is showing, like, directly telling us the passage of time and making it even more psychologically horrifying that they are there for eternity. That's what it seems like at this point. And it's really unsettling in a certain respect. And the other part that's interesting about that is that it's these characters that they have been there much longer than the Major, and they have been, like I said before, resigned to their fate of being trapped in this barrel. Yet they are seeing the mental breakdown almost of this newcomer who has not reached their part, but they are letting him play out his like fantasies of escape. They're preserving his hopeful spirit while they themselves are entrapped, and they are reserved to being resigned to their fate of being trapped. And again, there's this sense of helping others among this group, like this group wanting to help each other in certain ways. It's like we're all in this together kind of thing. And that sense of helping others kind of skirts the line, or it comes up close to the line of being enabling. like, oh, they're enabling him to have hope when there's no hope, when he shouldn't have any hope because they're in a hopeless situation. But instead of like enabling his efforts to escape that they know is not viable, it just becomes this group effort to stave off the insanity for the Major, because they are kind of at their wits' end, or they are defeated. But who are they to tamper down the energy of the Major? So I don't know. There's just something very wholesome about that, and I hope I articulated that well. So the Major keeps looking for ways to escape and everything, and the clown jokes that they should try acrobatics, and then the ballet dancer is like, wait, no, that's actually a good idea. And then they have this back and forth that's very fun, because again, Murray Matheson just nails it. He's fantastic, because he points out that, we can do that, we can jump around and everything, but gravity is, kind of a hindrance. Like, there's this thing called gravity. And if we were to fall, we would be, killed and injured and everything. But alas, they try it. And this is just really cool. Like, there is a level of suspense to this that made me very nervous throughout this end part of the episode. Because they're standing shoulder to shoulder, or not shoulder to shoulder, but standing on each other's shoulders, trying to reach the top. It's like a barrel of monkeys thing. And as the ballet dancer is climbing up, I don't know, it just made me nervous, and it made me nervous for this endearing character, the one kind of like endearing, I guess they're all kind of endearing. The homeless man doesn't really have much to do. Like, that was kind of a bummer, because like a lot of the efforts are on the Major and the clown and the ballet dancer, but as she is the one that is kind of climbing up to the top, you feel like very nervous for her. And at this point, I also thought that I really liked the idea of the Major's existence in the barrel, the Major's pure existence in it, and his resilience to try to escape. I like the idea of that bringing hope back to the group. And because like just a couple scenes before, they were just letting him do his thing, and then they have this wrinkle of hope that, like, oh yeah, we could just climb out, we can try to climb out and everything. I just kind of like that, again, that sense of community, that working together kind of thing, even when the majority of the people in the barrel are completely defeated and not wanting to try to escape. And so as they're climbing up, we get this really cool Dutch angle shot as they're standing on each other's shoulders. And again, the ballet dancer is making me nervous because she's climbing up and everything. And like, I was wondering if maybe she would fall and get injured. And that would be another kind of wrinkle or another kind of human element to it, that like, oh, she's like, I was fearful for her because she is arguably the most likable of the group. So yeah, I don't know, but she's just short from the top of it, and that is just deflating. That is a deflating effect, and the Major like is still resilient. He's telling them all to stretch and everything, and try to stretch. Everyone try to stretch, and he's desperate. And that's when the bell rings and they all fall down. And oh, that was such a cool surprise. That was such a cool moment, because it kind of like knocked the wind out of me a little bit, because I was nervous and everything. Also, I'm terrified of heights, so, that's another element. But I also think that, and granted, like, we're coming up to nearly the end of the episode, but I also think that it was maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity, because the ballet dancer's leg, like, they ask like how she's doing, and she says, oh, it's a little strained, but I'll be okay. And so that kind of makes it a little bit like the stakes aren't that high. Like, it just kind of seems like, I don't know, there isn't enough there. But then again, they're dolls. They're sentient dolls, so, and they can't really feel anything anyway, so it tracks within the logic of the episode. But still, that does not tamper the Major's resolve, because he says that they'll try again, and they'll tie a rope to the sword and use it as kind of a grappling hook kind of thing. And at this point, I was like, okay, we only have 5 minutes left. And at that point, I kind of realized, like, I think that this episode is maybe a bit of a missed opportunity, because I felt like it wasn't delving into the existential story that I hoped it would. The more I've watched it and thought about it, though, I'm kind of content with it. I don't know how it could have explored it any more, honestly, because, like I said, we do have those moments where it is exploring the human element of it, this urge to please each other and to be accepting of each other, and letting someone work out a problem even though we don't think it is a solvable problem. I think that there's a certain, like, respect in a societal kind of sense there, but it's a little bit hard to read. It's a little bit vague, and I think it could have done with a little bit more texture and a little more attention, really. So at this point, again, we have 5 minutes left, and I was thinking, like, okay, well, since Serling said that they're not going to end the nightmare, I wondered if this was going to go into a very, very bleak end. Like, I was wondering if it was going to be this completely ambiguous ending, and that it would just leave on this note of, like, okay, well, we don't, like, there's just no escape. So I was kind of nervous about that to an extent, and I was kind of curious how that would play out. But anyway, so they try again. The Major hooks the sword up and climbs up. And at this point, I again, I was kind of thinking, like, oh, I wonder if this is going to be a very bleak ending, because, like, I thought, oh, it would be interesting if he falls to his death on either side of the barrel, and that I was thinking, like, oh, I wonder if, like, the rest of the characters are just going to go back to being resigned to their fate and everything. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized, like, yeah, that would have been way, way too bleak. Yeah. So anyway, the Major makes it up to the top. The kind of physics of the sword, like, I didn't really believe that the sword would stay that level on that, but I mean, I guess it does make sense. I don't know. But anyway, he makes it to the top and is straddling the top. They all ask, like, where are we? What do you see? And then he immediately falls off the other side and into what I wasn't sure was snow or sand. It was snow. And that's kind of, that's almost the end of the episode. Like, the Major falls off, and then the characters look up, and the ballet dancer says, like, that he will come back and everything. That's another thing about the episode that really kind of has this this overarching kind of idea, is that throughout the episode, the clown is kind of admonishing the Major and saying, like, oh, logic doesn't exist here. There's no logic here, so you can't think logically. There's no circus. There's no war. That follows logic. We don't exist outside of this barrel, and that makes the entirety of this situation completely illogical. Yet the Major is not ready to accept that, so he is saying, like, there's a really good line where he says, yeah, well, none of us will get out of here unless one of us gets out of here. And that's logic that you can, that you can set your watch to. I don't remember exactly what the line was, but that's logic that, that's logic you can get behind. And I really like that kind of, like, resolve of the Major is really palpable and interesting throughout the story. But the ballet dancer says that he will come back for them. And the clown, in this weird sense of clarity that I don't necessarily think is justified, he says that he will come back, but not to get them, because we really are in hell. And maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's the persona of the clown just dropping and being this realistic rationalization of what's going on, and this realistic, like, what his actual thoughts are on it, because he is this animated, just, like, kooky character throughout the entire episode, and then he has this just very biting, like, real, like, horrible kind of viewpoint that he kind of takes the mask down to state it. So I don't know, maybe there's something there, I'm not sure. But then we get kind of the resolution of the episode with a little girl who picks up the Major doll from the snow, and she she taps the woman's shoulder and says, "Oh, hey, this doll dropped down. Here it is." And then she's like, "Oh, okay, you can go ahead and put it in this barrel that's marked View Park Girls Home, ages 2 to 10, 17th annual Christmas doll drive." And so the girl places the doll back in the barrel. And first of all, I just realized that this is a Christmas episode, sort of. So maybe the only Christmas episode isn't the Night of the Meek. But at that point, I kind of wondered. I thought, like, I wonder if the Major will still have amnesia, or if it'll reset, or if it'll end with them having the knowledge of the truth or whatever. And then we get the resolution that the bell that was ringing was the bell for donations that she was doing. And then we just get this closing shot of the doll on the dolls' vacant stairs. So we don't actually see them alive at the end, which is kind of a bummer, but I don't know. But it does kind of hint at it that the end scene is the ballet dancer with a single tear running down her cheek, as Rod Serling says the closing narration, which I will play right now.
Just a barrel. A dark depository where are kept the counterfeit make-believe pieces of plaster and cloth wrought in the distorted image of human life. But this added hopeful note, perhaps they are unloved only for the moment. In the arms of children, there can be nothing but love. A clown, a tramp, a bagpipe player, a ballet dancer, and a major. Tonight's cast of players in the odd stage, known as the Twilight Zone.
So that's 5 characters in search of an exit, and I think that the fact that they're donated toys for an orphanage is an interesting parallel to the toys having no one. Like, it tells this kind of undercurrent of, like, that's why I kind of think that, the line about them being unloved is a little too direct early in the episode, because that's kind of the major thesis of the episode, is that they are unwanted toys or unloved toys who are they are being donated to an orphanage where they, like Rod Serling says, that in the arms of children there can be nothing but love. And so it has this hopeful optimism at the end that they are being donated to children who need them because they are in an orphanage. And I think that that's really an interesting optimism to bring into this very nihilistic and existentially dark episode. And it's my belief, I don't have anything to corroborate this, but it has to be, but I believe that Toy Story took that kind of backwards optimism of the story in its ending and that closing narration and ran with it to make this very cool, iconic animated film, Toy Story. Yeah, so now to overall, this episode was fine. It was good. Probably top half in my mental rankings, but I do wish that there was a little bit more to it. But what I could glean from it, what I could dig in from it, is plenty. There's plenty there for me to kind of chew on. So I do appreciate it. And also, I do like that the closing narration includes the word depository, which is, was the original story's title, The Depository. So I've got some trivia here, and a rant about J.J. Abrams, which I'll talk about. But anyway, so speaking of the title, this is coming from Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. The title of the episode was changed to 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, and Marvin Peddle says that the depository sounded too much like suppository, and that's why they changed it. So I don't know. And it was actually Marvin Peddle's suggestion that they film that vertical climb scene by building the container horizontally and filming it that way. And that's how it ended up being filmed. And the barrel set itself was stored in like MGM lots, or I don't remember where, but the barrel was then used later for the season 4 episode No Time Like the Past. And it was even repurposed for The Outer Limits in 2 episodes, The Inheritors Part 2 and The Probe, which also gotta just give a shout out to my friend Victor's podcast, The Outer Limits podcast. Go check that out. Great stuff over there. And yeah, so then The other piece of trivia is that the little girl who picks up the Major doll was Mona Houghton, which is the daughter of producer Buck Houghton. Okay. And so going back to my notes, because I have some from Wikipedia, the episode title, Six Characters in Search of an Exit, is a play on the, and I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, on the Pirandello play titled Six Characters in Search of an Author. Yeah. And then in terms of the production, dolls were specifically crafted for the final shot. They were modeled after the actors who played the parts, so it's just completely, specifically crafted for that. And the episode, and okay, so there's a 1997 movie called Cube, which I haven't seen, but it's directed by Vincenzo Natali. He's a very interesting filmmaker. He did In the Tall Grass, and he also worked a lot on Hannibal, the show. But this episode was apparently an inspiration for his 1997 kind of breakout film Cube, which has a group of characters that are kind of trapped in a single space. I'm not sure what else is about it, but it is available to stream on IMDb Freevee or whatever it is, whatever the free streaming service is, that you can access it through Amazon Prime. Yeah, and I'll check it out, and I might put together something for Patreon for the $5 level for Cube and a couple other movies. I have this whole list of ideas that I want to do for that. But anyway, that's all to come later. Check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And so my final piece of trivia is something I already talked about, and I have a rant that I'm going to do because, oh God. Okay, so like I said, the TV series Felicity in, I think, 2000 paid homage to Five Characters in Search of an Exit and the Twilight Zone itself in Season 2, Episode 11, Help for the Lovelorn, which was directed by Five Characters in Search of an Exit's director, Lamont Johnson. Like I said, it's available on Hulu. It's very heavily influenced by Twilight Zone. It's in black and white. The Felicity title card is in the style of the Twilight Zone, opening, title. There are Dutch angles used throughout it that are seemingly very much in line with the Twilight Zone, and even some Twilight Zone music is played throughout it. And up to the first half, I watched the entire episode. It's available on Hulu. I watched the entire episode. I was thinking oh, this is actually pretty awesome. I don't know what's going on because I don't know the characters or anything. But it's pretty easy to follow out in isolation and everything. It kind of has this thing where Felicity is pining after a character and it's affecting her life, and she is given this card kind of like The Chaser, where someone gives her a card and says hey, if you go to this clinic, they'll help you, they'll help you not be so lovelorn. And throughout the episode, she's kind of hesitant about this surgery that needs to be done at the clinic, and it has shades of Eye of the Beholder and, like I said, The Chaser. But the end of the episode is a direct riff on Five Characters in Search of an Exit. There are 5 characters. Felicity and her companions are trapped in the single room, and it is literally, beat for beat, it's 5 characters in search of an exit. And it just completely deflated my enjoyment of the episode because it's a J.J. Abrams thing. He produced Felicity, and J.J. Abrams, as much as I enjoy and appreciate his hand in making one of my favorite shows of all time, Lost, he wasn't the showrunner. He just produced it. But he gave a lot of advice. He gave a lot of interesting things. As much as I appreciate him for that, the guy is a freaking hack. There's no other way to say it. I'm not even a Star Wars fan, but The Force Awakens kind of annoys me because it is literally a remake of A New Hope. It is A New Hope dressed up in this weird cosplay of the sequels or whatever. And then The Rise of Skywalker is just an absolute mess because he doesn't, it's just so annoying. But anyway, Five Characters in Search of an Exit is like Help for the Lovelorn becomes a 5 characters in search of an exit. It becomes just a remake. It's not it. I'm all for like an homage to classic storytellers and classic classics, the classics. I'm all for that. But when it's just a person who is just doing like fan fiction, it's so hacky and dumb and almost insulting. Like, I can't believe that they got Lamont Johnson to direct this episode of Felicity, and then they wrote it to be a direct ripoff of his iconic episode. Like, that feels so disrespectful. Like, oh, hey, Lamont Johnson, 40 or 30 some years ago, you directed this episode of The Twilight Zone. We're doing this big love letter to The Twilight Zone. Let's go ahead and have you direct it. Oh yeah, I'm on board. Oh, by the way, the ending is going to be the exact same as your iconic episode. So just do what you like. That just feels so... Ugh, that rubs me in the wrong way so hard. And I was so angry about that. My eyes were in the back of my head because they were rolling so hard, because it just made me so angry. And it's like I tweeted this on Twitter at OV Anthology Pod, but like J.J. Abrams has done enough of this fan fiction masquerading as originality or original genre filmmaking, enough of that over the years that it's not a surprise that he did this in 2000 with the Twilight Zone. But it also in my head the entire time I just saw the gif from Breaking Bad where Aaron Paul is screaming he can't keep getting away with this, because he can't keep getting away with this. God, it's so frustrating. But anyway, I'm now railing against this producer for something he did 22 years ago, so I'm gonna... Yeah, whatever. So anyway, those are my thoughts on 5 characters in search of an exit. Stay tuned for my forthcoming Felicity podcast, apparently. But not really. I'm not starting another podcast. But as always, let me know what you thought of 5 characters in search of an exit. And yeah, I'm going to now round out the episode with a brief spoiler-free review of episode 22 from Science Fiction Theater's first season, titled A Visit from Dr. Pliny. So, A Visit from Dr. Pliny originally aired on September 24th, 1955. Like I said, it is, at least as of this recording, on July 2nd, 2022. It is available on YouTube. There is a YouTube link in the show notes, so hopefully it's still there when you're listening to this. Yeah, so the episode synopsis is... Quirky strangers appear at the Research Institute. They have curious ideas and unexplained knowledge. Local researchers aren't sure if they are legitimate or if they are dangerous nuts. What will happen if they are allowed into the lab? It was directed by Henry S. Kessler, written by Sloan Nibley, and stars Edmund Gwen, William Schallert, and Morris Ankrum. And the pre-show of the episode was this kind of fun little example or whatever that Truman Bradley did, where he has this umbrella and uses it to cover himself under this big hanging faucet of to replicate rain. And he uses that as an example about how we are constantly bombarded by particles, not just water from the sky, but particles. And he talks about cosmic rays from outer space are hitting us at all times and stuff. So it's kind of interesting and a little silly, I guess, but then he says his signature, like, oh, this is the theme of the story that we're going to tell you today. And I've got to say, I'm now 22 episodes into science fiction theater for this project, for this podcast. And I think that this might be my favorite episode. This is an episode that kind of plays with this shared, like it actually has like this, first of all, it is more science fiction than most of the other episodes I've reviewed. And it has this thematic element to it where it is reflecting like society, our world, our collective like scientific advancements at this point. And so I guess I'll kind of give it away up front because it's pretty clear from the outset. Dr. Pliny and his companion, he has a companion, an assistant named Mr. Thomas. They're very strange. They go to the house of the widow of an acclaimed scientist who works at this Institute of Advanced Astrophysics, and they ask to keep to rent a room, and then they take a bunch of his books and they speed read through them. It's very peculiar and strange. They don't sleep at night. And it's very clear, like, they are aliens. Like, it isn't stated specifically, but they are aliens from another planet who have visited Earth to try to give, to impart knowledge and advance our scientific community and advance our science to where we can be, much more advanced. And Dr. Pliny, played by Edmund Gwenn, it's really interesting because his performance, maybe it's because he's kind of he's a little bit he's kind of short and he has like this English accent, but he reminded me so much of Dr. John Hammond from Jurassic Park, played by Richard Attenborough. And like the cadence of his voice, like I wonder if Attenborough patterned his performance after Edmund Gwenn in the visit of a visit from Dr. Pliny, because it feels like that's maybe not as obscure a reference, but it's very, very similar. So it's interesting. But anyway, so I really like the way that this episode is structured, because the entire first act is basically giving us all of the information about how strange Dr. Pliny and Mr. Thomas are, how much they are very much not of this world. And it's basically him convincing the scientists at the Institute to let him work in the lab. And that's the end of the first act. Then the second act comes in, and now some time has passed, and Dr. Pliny is working in the Institute, and he's basically creating this machine that will create, that will have far-reaching implications for limitless energy. He's harnessing the energy of the cosmos to have like a not perpetual motion machine, but like harness energy and end the atomic age and everything. It's very lofty, very huge. And what I love about this, I won't give away exactly what happens, but I love this because the show is propping up science and the scientific community and has this reverence for science. And I love that. And again, I say this every time, I wish that there was something like this in the sci-fi anthology format in modern day. Someone needs to remake this, have like a reputable scientist or someone host it like Truman Bradley and create a sci-fi anthology show based around the science and kind of, I don't know, because like watching this, every time I watch this, I wonder how many George McFlys were there that gained a passion for STEM, like for science and everything, and went into STEM like education and fields and everything, and like how influential was this show at the time. It's just something that I don't think we really have here now in the modern era, but it just shows the respect for that. And then what happens, there's a dramatic turn that ends with I mean, it's pretty light drama. It's pretty light, all told. But there's this line that Mr. Thomas says to Dr. Pliny, and this kind of gives away a little bit. Sorry, but they are basically forced out of the lab. They're forced out of the institute. They are going to escape. It's not as dramatic as it probably could have been, but Mr. Thomas says this line to Dr. Pliny and says, "It's expected." Like he says that what happened that forced them to have to leave before they finish their work. He says it's expected because, and the quote is, "If you tell them a lie big enough, they'll believe you. If you tell them a truth big enough, they'll lock you up." And if that doesn't have resonance today in the modern political climate, I don't know what does. But it is it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I love that line. I think that tells such an interesting story about where society was in the 50s, and it just says a lot. It says a lot. Yeah. So, I won't give much else away. I really liked this story. I really liked this episode, and it leaves on a note of kind of optimism, in a certain way that I won't give away, but it kind of has this resolve that, yeah, maybe if there are other like advanced intelligence out in the cosmos, out in the universe, maybe our puny human lives will, maybe they won't be hostile, and maybe they will be, forgiving of our shortcomings, and still help us advance and reach a point where, science can be perfected or advanced a lot, I guess. So I don't know, but anyway, I think that'll do it for this episode of Anthology. Check out that episode of Science Fiction Theater though, because I really did like it a lot. Next week on the podcast, I'm hoping that I can stay consistent with weeks and everything, but next time on the podcast will be episode 79, in which I will be reviewing A Quality of Mercy, and also episode 23 of Science Fiction Theater, titled The Strange People at Picos. So stay tuned for that, or check that out later. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening and for supporting me and everything. It means a lot. For more exclusive content and stuff, just a bunch of stuff like Stephen King short fiction reviews, movie commentary tracks, TV reviews, book reactions, all this stuff, check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I have different levels of tiers for it, so check that out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. And now, here's a short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. To hear the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. And really just cool. But the problem that I had with that is that knowing the short story, I'm like almost 100% sure that the sister subplot isn't in the story. And it really feels like they needed something to something to kind of expand the story. And wow, what an ass. I'm sure the mic picked that up, but this Mustang just flew past like everyone on the street here. What an asshole. Anyway, so it's like they needed something to pad the story. They needed something to pad the runtime and to give a connection to the investigation and the outside world outside of Finn's, abduction and held hostageness, and his confinement. That's the word. And I respect that. I understand that, and I do agree that they needed something more to pad out the story. And I do like the way that it kind of all connects at the end, but I kind of feel like that whole subplot could have used a little bit more baked into it. Like, I kind of feel like if they were going to go that route, they should have maybe had a few more scenes to establish Gwen's ability or Gwen's, power or whatever.
This podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.